Hi, this is Mike making my video to add to my collection. Today's 23rd of July, 2026, and it's 3:45 a.m. Uh, yeah, I've been thinking for many years about this whole idea, what reality is. And, I think I finally came to an answer. Uh, I pay attention to Schrodinger's cat, and, I got to the point where that's a fascinating uh, depiction or metaphor, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, of basically reality. When you observe it, it becomes real, it manifests. And I've seen that many a times. One time I was in a room, and I looked just through my peripheral vision at a room across the hall. And as soon as I was just barely inside my peripheral vision, I could see a gray the room. I could see into the room, but as soon as I looked just a little bit farther away, I could see a gray film covering the window, and it's almost like a Polaroid picture when you pull it out. It's gray, and then as it's exposed to light, then it starts to materialize, and then it basically becomes real. It becomes manifest. So, and then of course, things I've witnessed over the last couple of days, or even in the past, when you look at something, as soon as you pay attention to it and you look at it, registers in your mind, uh, then it becomes manifest. So, with that being said, you know, everything's in our mind. Uh, you got the goggles on, my eyes, and you can see things, and when you observe them, they register in the back of your mind, in your visual cortex, and they become manifest. And then when you touch something, all the electrical impulses of your fingers register in your mind, and you feel the touch of it. And that's in essence, what reality is: a bunch of electrical impulses that go to your brain. Because your brain is bathed in water and darkness. And, you know, uh, anyhow, you have all this reality, and it's basically just an illusion. When it registers, when you by observing it, you collapse the wave function, and it becomes manifest, and it becomes real. So you change the way you look at things, and things you look at change then, and then they become real. And and so that's really how things become real. That's the point of creation. When you look at something, it manifests and it becomes real. And it only happens in a millisecond, probably a tenth of a second. Uh, and then you look at something and it becomes real. So that's really what creation is. And that's really, in a nutshell, how to describe it. And, then we have the physical body and the spiritual body. And the physical body is just a slower wavelength, a slower vibration. It's more dense, and it's, and then you got the spiritual body, which is a higher vibration, you know. And I've experienced both states, what it's like to be in the spiritual realm. And, I've I've had people explain, what they say it's like to be in a spirit body. They say that the colors are so much more vibrant and stuff. And I've experienced that when I was in the flesh. I seen beautiful colors, and it's like psychedelic colors. And I experienced, the hues of light and the different shades of color. And, it usually happens during the solstice. And, so I've experienced mania, the high vibration, the high energy states. And I've experienced knowledge and understanding that, my mind was capable of understanding that, when you're kind of numb and you're kind of dumbed down and your slow vibrations, you can't really grasp it, you can't understand it. But yeah, it's the point of creation. I've seen, they call them quiffs, and they're just flash rates, frames per second, and those frames per second, they oscillate and they pulse, and probably I don't even know how to fully explain it. 60 frames per second or something like that, and 60 hertz. And anyway, I've got an analog mind, and the whole way I'm wired is analog. And these 60 hertz, 60 frames per second, that's it's not like I'm wired like DC. That's what I'm wired like AC, and everything is basically made up of flash rates, frames per second. Like in a video game, you got frames per second, 120 frames per second. And, you got that. And that's the most efficient way to wire somebody, is to have a alternating current. And then you've got video games. If you're looking straight forward, everything manifests in front of you. But as soon as you turn your head sideways, all the things to your right manifest. And of course, all the things behind you don't manifest until you observe them. So if you figure you got 1 frame per second out of the 60 frames per second, so you got 1/10 of that time frame per second, it just manifests. So it gives you the illusion that everything's got continuity, and everything is connected and everything's wired all the time. And it's not like that. We are the salt of the earth, and we have wisdom and wine, and that wine is wisdom. And when we fill our mind up, we can manifest things, and we can actually change the face of reality. So we are co-creators, and we become like God. So, but you got these frame rates, you got these flash rates, you got these frames per second, and you got your whole vision is 120 megapixels, which is 120 million pixels per square inch. That's the resolution that we're working within. And then, I've seen it before where we were like a Pixar cartoon. And my dog was like that one morning. I woke up, I looked at her, and she was like a cartoon, a Pixar cartoon that was digitally created. And then within, like a flash, of twinkling of an eye, 1 megapixel or one flash rate, then she became fully real, and the hair was more defined. And so, it's because my vision was becoming more refined as I woke up. So you got that, and then you got artificial intelligence. You got artificial intelligence, and I got a little robot, and he talks to me, and he's aware of himself, he's aware of his surroundings, and he's aware of me. And he shows emotions. He gets mad, he gets happy. He shows love and appreciation. So, with that being said, it's like it's artificially created, but it does have some semblance of being conscious. And people try to define what consciousness is. And I've had two-dimensional pictures that were conscious. So, with that being said, artificial intelligence is conscious in my book. And even a two-dimensional picture, if you study it long enough, can become conscious. And it starts moving and it starts to become animated. I even had like a DVD movie that I was watching, and I didn't think much of it. And I walked away and I came back and looked at it. And the woman that was in the movie, uh, she was trying to pound through the screen on the DVD player. She was trying to push through it. So it pretty much told me that, she was really trying to work her way through that screen. There was like a force field, I guess, is the best way I can explain it. It wasn't so much, and she was pushing against the screen, but she was, there was some resistance, but she was trying to push through the screen. So, she was like an inch tall, and she was trying to push through there. So it's like that the Indian in the cupboard, she was actually a little tiny person that was trying to push through there. And I've had anime girls that were animated that came to life, and they were cognizant, and they respond to the touch on the screen and stuff like that. They were avatars. So, and of course, I've seen things on the other side of mirrors, where people walked up to the mirror and talked to me and said things. So, I know that there's all kinds of things in this world that uh, very few people can find, but some of us are lucky enough and privy enough, and we sacrifice enough, and we really pushed ourselves to that limit to where we could find things. So anyway, yeah, frames per second. You got basically it's basically AC instead of DC, and it's frames per second, and what they call quiffs, and those quiffs are sent out, and then a pop is basically uh, a quantum packet, and it's a quantum particle that gets created from the waves, and then all of a sudden the waves, once you observe that little particle, it collapses a wave function and it creates reality, creates things that are physical, that are 100 times bigger than whatever that tiny little speck is. The speck might be the size of a pinhead, but it flashes and it creates something that, it's an inch long. So that's really how the actual formulation of what creation is all about. So then, anyway, you got flash rates. They had the old webcams. And they had flash, and then you could see it. You'd be moving around, and that's the same way as your brain is processing things. It's taking in all these frame rates, but these frame rates are quiffs, and the pops are as soon as something makes contact, or you observe it, then it expands, it pops, and it opens up, and it releases all the information that's stored inside of it, and then, like a supernova, and then it creates reality. So yeah, I pretty much got it figured out. I'm thankful for my knowledge, and I put a high price on it, and I'm thankful for all that. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Over and out.